Cheers, guys. Ethics911, welcome to the Elitist Geek. In this video, I want to look at video game prices through the last few decades. One of the things that kind of drives me a little nuts is hearing how expensive PC games are, how expensive console games are, handheld games. Are they though? Are they really expensive? How about when we look at it in the context of the last 3 decades? Are we paying more relative to then for a video game? We certainly get less, at least in the physical goods department. You could argue we get better gameplay. You could also argue that games require more people to program. There's more people involved in the marketing, the development cycle, really from start to finish, than there ever were historically in the 1980s or 90s. But let's get back to the cost issue, or the list price of a game, and let's look at that in terms of adjusting for inflation. How does the price of a game today compare with what we paid back then? And the other side of that coin is, how much would what we paid for a game back then be in today's dollars? And I think it's a really interesting exercise because, contrary to popular belief, games are cheaper now than they have ever been in the history of video games. Let's take a look, all right? I'm going to go back to, I've got even older games, but we're going to look at a few RPGs here. Let's start with the 1980s, all right? So we've got 2 from 1988. And the 2 that we have, and you can ignore the used sticker price because this was a PC version that I purchased just to replace the manuals for my Commodore 64 version. And I purchased this box set of Ultima V when it was already a few years old. All right, so I paid $4.99, probably in the early 90s, for a 1988 game. But what did the game cost when it came out? Well, it was $49.99 here in Canada. So I'm going to talk about Canadian prices, but really, relative to the US, it's pretty much the same, and I'd be willing to bet Australia is not that far off. Especially Australia and Canada have had a history, a real kind of fiscal history of parity between the two currencies, or near parity. With any given time, the Canadian or Australian dollar were usually within about 10 cents of each other. But let's take a look. So, 2 games. Here's Questron II, and here is Ultima V. All right. So both games were $49. So $49.99, $50 basically, right? Now, doing the calculation, and there's a few online, and I tried a couple of different ones, inflation adjustment calculators, but they were all pretty much the same. They tended to adjust similarly, or the results were similar. What would $49.99 in 1988 be in today's dollars? I think you'll be astounded. $89.35. So let's round down. $89. Now, that's not to say we don't pay for games today paying that much, but they're generally collector's editions, right? And they will include physical goods. And that's the argument that you could make for the difference in cost, but we'll get into that. There's way more variables than just that. Keep in mind, now games are digital, so the whole distribution aspect is way less complicated than it was in the past. The majority of PC games are now available on Steam, Good Old Games, Origin, right? There's a few different services, but for the most part, it's digital. You can still get physical boxes, but they're far and few in between. Let's look at some of these, and it's really interesting, especially Ultima V, okay? But we'll look at Questron II as well. And I think they're two sides of the same coin in that historically the Ultima series was always known for awesome pack-ins, right? You couldn't wait to get a deep retail box of an Ultima home because you were guaranteed a cloth map, an instruction manual, of course the discs, and usually some kind of medallion, coin, or stones, or a combination of the two. I don't have the medallion for Ultima 5 anymore, but let's take a look at what you got back then, all right? Now, this is a hint guide, so this did not come with the game. It's called Paths of Destiny. It was in the used game that I purchased, right? And it had all your maps. This would be no different than GameFAQ today, which is a free service, right? But back then you'd pay $10 to $20 for a hint guide like this. So let's leave that out of it, and let's just look at the rest. And look at this. This is just awesome. This is a cloth map. This is the actual cloth map you would get for Ultima 5 for Caesarea, or Sosaria, however you want to pronounce it. I always pronounced it, me and my friends, Caesarea, right? Britannia, I guess. Ultima 3 was Caesarea, so this would be Ultima 4 and 5 was Britannia. But yeah, look at that. And you look at the back, and you can even see the stitching, right? Like, this was an awesome pack-in. So that was the Ultima 5 map. You got that with the game. Again, you got stones and or a medallion. I don't have that, but here we go. You got the Book of Lore, which is a 54-page manual, which talked about the government, right? It talked about spells. So there's the fourth circle of spells. I always loved the Ultima Despor, Insanct, like the names, the kind of quasi-Latin that they used was really cool. Here's the chart of spells. So there we go. But you get the idea, right? So, I mean, it was a quality manual that you tended to get with an RPG. This is something I don't miss. So keep in mind this was the PC version. So it would have been EGA, this one, which came with 4 discs. The Program, Britannia, the Dungeon, and the Underworld disc. So 4 5.25-inch floppy discs. A special notice for Tandy owners, and that's an interesting side note, is the Tandy was kind of it was Radio Shack's PC clone, sort of. Not officially or unofficial, not clone in the sense that it would be later in the 90s and certainly in the 2000s, right? They actually had, there was a time where the Tandy machine was actually better than your typical PC when it came to EGA and colors, because a lot of the PCs tended to be CGA. And yeah, you could buy adapters, but the Tandy machines were among the first of the PCs to regularly be configured with EGA and then ultimately with VGA before the demise. They were overpriced, but if you were a computer noob at the time, you could do worse than go with a Tandy if you were looking for a PC. And then there's some kind of, oh, this is actually for Ultima Underworld, so we won't include that. But then, aside from the manual, you have a Ultima 5 summary. This includes all the bullet points, like the summary of information, all your keyboard strokes, right, for running the game. So it gave you all the important information in summary form without having to dig through your book of lore. So anyways, you can see it included a lot, right? So Questron II, by comparison, this is the Amiga version I have, 3.5-inch disc. You would get your typical, I used to love this. SSI is actually one of my favorite RPG companies of old. You can see they include their advertisement, right? So you've got all the old games for SSI. Damn, there were some good ones there. Fantasy, lots of war games. SSI was really known for their war games and their RPGs for a time. Like, here you go. Here's the fantasy games along the side. Those were the first RPGs that I really got into on my Commodore 64. They were just fantastic. They were party-based. They were as close as you could get to Dungeons & Dragons, automated Dungeons & Dragons at the time, in my opinion. All right. Here's the Questron II manual. So much smaller than the Ultima one, but 14 pages. But nice quality, kind of cardboard, light cardboard stock paper. Also a summary card came with it, just like Ultima. But that was it. So really, and the reason I wanted to show you guys that is, if you're looking at the $49 and saying, yeah, okay, well, maybe Ultima V cost that much because it had extra stuff in it. But you can see that wasn't the case. Other games were coming in at the same price and included a lot less, although a lot less relative to the day, because now you really do get a lot less, right? So let's take another look at another SSI game. This is a gold box game. The gold box were just fantastic D&D party-based games that came out in the late 80s, early 90s, I think up to 1991. Same idea, you know, you get the Adventurer's Journal, rule book, summary sheets, and lots of advertisements. What about this game? Well, this was 1991, $49.99 at the time also, which in today's dollars would be $76.71. $76. So you can see they've actually, it's trending down as opposed to up, right? Let's see if that continues with, now we're going to jump ahead 9 years to the turn of this millennium and look at Baldur's Gate, which still has its original price tag on it. This is Baldur's Gate II, Shadows of Om, $67.99 Canadian dollars again. That represents in today's dollars $90.92. So say 91 bucks for a game, which you still got quite a bit for. So let's take a look. You've got, but you could already see that the quality of stuff was definitely diminishing in certain areas, right? So you didn't get a cloth map, but you still got a decent map. I mean, that's not bad. But it's paper, right? You got your typical instruction or advertisement, Fallout, but the manuals that were packed with Baldur's Gate and Neverwinter Nights were fan-fucking-tastic. It was almost, for any D&D geeks, like basically getting a DM's and Player's Guide bundled together. Look at this monster. Properly bound with metal binding rings. 200, yeah, 264 pages. And like I said, it's basically like having a player's handbook and DM's guide in one. Every spell in the game, all about the cities. This has seen more toilet reading hours than probably any game manual I own. In my history of using the can, I would say Chibi tops. Baldur's Gate II. So let's throw that back in. Now you compare that with today's games, and your average PC game, digital game, is about $49. So really, in terms of inflation, gaming has actually stayed about the same if you don't account for inflation, right? Year over year, the price has roughly been $49 to $69. It was in the 80s and the 90s, depending on the game. I remember regularly paying in that range, $49 to $69 was standard. That's still the case. But in terms of our spending dollars, we can actually buy more games today than we ever could. Now, we've given up some things. We've gone to digital distribution. And you could argue, yes, games could probably be cheaper, but could they? And that's what I wanted to touch on as well in this video, is that you got to remember, games like Ultima V had just a handful of programmers. You generally had one or two people to do the music, one or two doing graphics, and one or two doing game logic code, and then a small software testing team, which was usually outsourced or done in-house, right? But you had basically under 10 people involved directly in the making of a game like this, compared to a game like Witcher 3 from CD Projekt, which probably uses 20 to 30 plus people were involved in the game, right? Because they're more complex. So, all in all, I think things have actually gotten better over time. They've stayed the same, and in some ways gotten better. They definitely haven't gotten worse. You know, you look at games like the 3DS, I pay $39 to $49 is the typical, right? And again, back then for Nintendo cartridges, or Game Boy even, you were paying roughly the same. So anyways, it's kind of neat when you look at it that way, eh? So, interested to see what you guys think about that. Did I miss anything? If you liked some of those games, trust me, I've got almost all my original games in decent condition in the boxes. I tend to be a bit of a hoarder pack rat, which drives my wife nuts, but there's certain things I can, like electronics, neutral electronics, not PCs or consoles, but like a TV or a PC, I got no problem. When I'm done with it, I'll hand it off to somebody, I can dispose of it, no second thoughts. But stuff that's directly tied to my gaming hobby is a lot tougher for me to get rid of. So anyways, let me know your thoughts in the comments below, guys. What's your opinion? What's your take on the price of PC games now versus the past? Or maybe you're younger and you just think about that within the context of like the last 5-10 years. Interested to hear what you say. Like this video if you like it. Subscribe if these are the types of videos you like. I went on a little bit of a ramble on this one, but I thought it was kind of cool to just go through the boxes and show you what was packed in some of them. As always, guys, until next video, cheers.